Thank you. I was trying to get his attention. All right. I'd like to introduce Nick Xenakis of counsel at Covington and Burling LLP, where he draws on his legal and Capitol Hill expertise to provide regulatory and legislative advice to clients in a range of industries, including technology, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and connected and autonomous vehicles. Prior to joining Covington, Nick served as General Counsel on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, where he oversaw all policy efforts in that committee's jurisdiction. Nick?
Thank you so much. It's a tough act to follow, but I think hopefully we're going to touch on some of the things that the previous panel spoke about, and specifically some of the borderless solutions or non-solutions where we get left. But as was mentioned, my name is Nick Xenakis. I'm a lawyer at Covington and Burling, which is a multinational law firm where I work in the public policy practice, covering a wide variety of issues, but really focused on technology and artificial intelligence, as well as automated vehicles. I'm here because a few years ago, let's see if this works. There we go. A few years ago, Covington partnered with Mcity to help produce a series of white papers to see what we could do to draw on all of our experience, because I don't know how many lawyers are left in the room, but I'm sure all of them will agree with me that really what every problem needs is more lawyers. And so what we did is we thought, well, how can we contribute the most? And a lot of our work in the technology space had been around data and data security and data protections. And so looking at how smart cities worked, we thought that we could best commit our resources to trying to figure out which problems were presenting themselves and how to solve them. And you'll see here up on this slide, there's no question that the data that's provided from smart cities and automated vehicles has tremendous value. Traffic congestion, safety, municipal expansion, and so looking at the ways to make sure that becomes easier and better fostered. What we did is we drew, just to draw back, this was our big question. So explore mechanisms for deploying smart technologies and enabling the collection and analysis of transportation data in a manner that promotes public trust and is consistent with privacy concerns and other legal obligations. And it's that last part of that phrase where we really focused on, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about, which is the public trust and privacy concerns within the legal obligations. To kind of fast forward of where we ended up, we're going to kind of talk about 4 areas here. And if I was going to tell you a theme to those 4 areas, it's that. Success in this space is really drawing on the public trust, having people be aware of what's happening with the data, what the data is used for, the scope of the data, combined with the legal obligations from it. That's where really seems to be the direction to go. That may not seem novel. I think that we see that in a lot of spaces where we're seeing really new novel technologies come about, that it's really the engagement and opportunities to engage. And essentially what we found in these 4 areas was there are unique ways in which public trust needs to be clear, and clarity and transparency need to come about. So what we looked at is legislative and regulatory frameworks. Are there laws or regulations that could appropriately enable the deployment of smart technologies and the use of transportation data? Contracting tools, which I will preview now, is the most legal part of this presentation. We're going to talk about specific licensing agreements and what it means for data sharing. Though it's the most legal, in my opinion, I think it's probably actually the most important for day-to-day operations and for people to consider, especially, and I will say this, a lot of these letters were written even before the past couple months, before we saw even the larger explosion in artificial intelligence. And so use of the data becomes even that much more important, and understanding how the licensing comes about is really key to not only the cities themselves, but also where the data can be used in the future. Technology frameworks, we're going to talk about specifically in the privacy landscape. Privacy, I think, is the real driving underlying factor in the success in a lot of these smart cities and automated vehicles. And then finally, oversight and government frameworks, which is the one that I'm particularly excited to talk about, and not to bury the lead, but gets at the borderless solutions we discussed at the end, and sort of we'll see kind of where the federal and state frameworks are going. With all those in mind, I think let's jump into the first one, which is the data governance frameworks for smart cities. So in trying to take a look at data governance frameworks, once again, how smart cities are dealing with the data they have, this is what we came up with our key considerations. Government versus private involvement, the extent to which the government is controlling the infrastructure versus private industry, law enforcement aims versus surveillance concerns. And I'll tell you, these two are the key two, or I would say the top two considerations more than the rest of these. These two are really defining what we've seen in recent years, success in smart cities technology and deployment. Along with those, though, are key things like scope and purpose of data, local laws and regulations, public trust, transparency, and accountability. Before I forget, as I race through these, I'm going to race through a lot of these slides. I want to be very respectful of people's time and keep to about the 30-minute mark. Also, I want to encourage everybody to actually read the white papers themselves. I think these all go into depth a much higher degree. We'll have some time at questions for the end, but this is just the general overview. I really encourage people to go to Mcity's website, read the white papers. They do deep dives into all of this. But coming back to these points, the key considerations. So this first one, which I mentioned is one of the key first ones, which is balancing government involvement and privatization. Just out of curiosity, and usually I worked for the last panel, so I'm going to try it here. If I was going to ask people in this room if they're familiar what happened in Toronto with smart cities, how many people? Yeah, how many people are aware of it? I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm going to take that people know what's going on. So I'm not going to give too much background on it, but the idea is a Smart Labs, a company wanted to invest strongly in an area in Toronto to build up its smart city infrastructure. And there tend to be problems right at the beginning because there was a lack of clarity about what was happening. The private industry investment, the population didn't feel like they had a good grasp on what was being done, where things were being built, who was going to have access to the data, where it was going to be sent. And that started at the beginning. Now, in response to that, industry did come out and try to say, well, let's put out some more. Let's give some more detailed examples of our investment. Let's give more details of our data protection plan. But by that point, the horse had been out of the barn, and things took off, and the public really had strong skepticisms of what was going on. And it's a really good example of why the government involvement in privatization is really important. Figuring out where you've got the private industry is obviously going to be key in the success of smart cities, but making sure how that's working organically with both the local government as well as the public citizenry. The second is considering law enforcement aims in light of surveillance concerns. Once again, I'm just curious if people are familiar with what happened with San Diego and smart streetlights. So there was a deployment in San Diego of smart streetlights, and essentially streetlights that are meant to go off and on when people are around them. At the same time, it's taking data, it's taking information, and it was only sharing that with the San Diego Police Department. And you had a lot of people in San Diego quite upset about that. This worry about surveillance, their protection of privacy there, all the privacy concerns. This degree of surveillance and privacy is, once again, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the top two trends that we see running through frameworks. Addressing these, the government and private partnership as well as surveillance concerns are the things to focus on. And we've seen really help define success in these areas. The third is defining the scope and purpose of the data. So Columbus, Ohio, received a large grant to help develop its smart city technology. And what they did that was a little bit different is they made very clear in a publishment what their objectives were and what they wanted to do. So unlike what happened in the first example in Toronto, it was all on the table. This is what we want to happen. This is how we want it to work. This is where we're going in the future, which in many ways helped address some of those concerns about transparency and understandability. At the same moment, though, there was still a downside, which is if you don't meet those metrics and you don't meet those goals, then people think you didn't do well. So once again, it's a balance. It's not just clear. You've got to figure out how you're going to do it, how you're going to frame it. One thing we're going to talk about as well, and this comes up later on, is interaction with local laws and regulations. Are they good for the technology development? How constricting are they? One area, one jurisdiction that has been particularly good about pushing forward local laws and regulations has been New York. Eric Adams, the mayor, often talks about how he was a programmer back in the day in city government, and so he wants to use that, and so he's passed local laws, having a chief privacy officer, having a Data Open Privacy Act, to really make clear this is the governing framework that we're going to use for a smart city and its technology, and for bringing people in. Once again, having that is important. Having that understandability and what the environment you're going to work in is key if you're going to actually build things up, because you know the legal restraints, you know the guardrails. At the same time, though, just having that framework doesn't mean it's going to succeed. Just because you have the laws around and just because you have the infrastructure doesn't mean it's actually going to move forward. You need more. You still need that investment. You still need the interest, and you still need people to want to push the technology to help grow the environment. And the final part is garnering public trust through transparency and accountability. I know that I've been harping on this through all these 5, but once again, it's important. Chicago is a great example of their Array of Things project of allowing people, first you are advertising, this is what we're going to be doing, this is how we're going to be constructing our technology, but more importantly, you've got repeated opportunities for people to engage in the process, for experts to engage in the process, to tell you this is how this is developing, this is what we want, these are our concerns, and you have that adaptability, you have that ongoing conversation. It's a great example of how this could succeed for what we see as a functioning good government framework. So, a successful smart city. As in almost all things, the first thing is you got to figure out what you're doing, what's your defined goal. So in a smart city, it really ends up being 2 things. Could be number 1, we want to make sure that we're responsive to citizens. We want to know all the citizens' needs. We want to know if it's worried about pollution, if it's crime, whatever it is. We want to make sure the city is able to gather metrics and help address them. The second option is helping grow the city itself. And so you need to figure out where you're putting your resources, what you're trying to prioritize. The second is, once that's determined, getting the meaningful stakeholder buy-in. Making sure that citizens, making sure it's the government, making sure it's private industry. Having everybody visibility and a key and skin in the game when it comes to trying to build the smart city and move it forward. And finally, it's a flexible and iterative process. You have to be able to adapt. Concerns change. Once again, as I mentioned, a lot of these papers were written before these last several months that we saw with the dawn of AI, which has become a much stronger, it was already a focus, but it's become that much more intense. You need to be able to adapt, you need to be able to respond, and you need to have people feel like they've got a way to voice their concerns when trying to move these frameworks forward. So those are really the kind of key, the key keys to success for what we see a data governance framework for a smart city. So what does that actually mean? So you've got a smart city, it's up and running, you got people invested, people are moving forward, you're collecting all this data, great. What happens with the data? What do you do after that? Like I said, this is the most legal part of this, but I think it's also probably the most important. So are there standard contracts or provisions that could be employed to enable the desired uses of transportation data? How can we make this easy? If you have transportation data from a city and you want to provide that, or you have transportation data from anything, from any CAV, how do you provide that? What's the best way to do it? So the first thing is we identified the target terms. You've got traffic information, pedestrian information, signage, mappage, road work. You've got all these different things that you could be looking for. All the sort of data that you wanted to use for a variety of purposes. Once again, it could be you want the data for a research study, or you want to use it to train an AI model. You've got a whole slew of data. So those are the things we're looking at. And then we looked at specific states, which we thought were particularly good in outlining how this contractor can work. I don't know if anybody's seen a sample data set. This is sometimes how it looks. You'll see in the bottom left corner the contracting license of what you can use the data for. I will spare people reading all the legalese. Once again, it's impenetrable. This is why you need to hire people at law firms, because otherwise we don't have jobs. So in working on a license, every time, I don't know how other people work in IP law or have background in that, when you hear a license, the first word that usually comes about is copyright. There's a copyright protection. Do I need a license to use something? Data, as itself, it's not copyrightable. So why are we talking about it? What is copyrightable are some databases, if they're a compilation, or sometimes some of the data within various databases can be copyrighted. So there's no copyright for mere data, facts or figures. If the data is an original work of authorship, like an image, we see this all the time now, it's painting, it's anything else, then copyright may be applicable to that data. And a database could be protectable under copyright law if it's a compilation. You've made this data, you've put it all together. There's a lot of work that went in. It's almost artistic in doing it. Therefore, you've got a copyrightable protection over the database. And even the data or database is subject to copyright protection, there's still ways you can use it under the fair use doctrine. So, when people are trying to get licenses for this data, there are some ways that work better than others. Some ways here, like a mere disclaimer, is a limitation or liability. We are providing you this data, but you can't hold us liable for anything. We're disclaiming any rules, anything like that. Oftentimes, that is not a great position that people want to put in. They're going, well, I need to figure out what part of this data is copyrightable. Is it copyrightable? Can I use this for fair use? What can go on? It's not the best way for the data to get out there to use it. You could have vague and permissive use rights, which go along with that. What can I use this for? It's unclear. If it just says you're allowed to use this for legal means or for public use, it's undefined. Obligation to share derivatives. Great, you've given me this data. What can I use it for now? Do I know? What can happen with it? If I use it, once again, for an AI model, what's the degree? Do I then need to share the model? Do I then need to share the model's outputs if I use the data? What happens there? Lack of clarity. We're talking about some specific licenses. You've got Creative Commons licenses, you've got open database licenses, database content licenses, public domain defined licenses, all these different ways to do it. So as I mentioned, mere disclaimers of limitations or liability, they don't include specific use of rights. They're difficult to determine whether copyright subsists in the data or database and whether its fair use applies. Once again, not ideal for ways to share the data. Permissive use rights, some are very permissive, especially allowing commercial and other uses. They're likely acceptable. You can use it for some things, even though they could be more specific. Vague use rights might not be clear enough to ensure that providers may use the data to develop their products and services. You don't know how far you can use this or for what you want to build. Ambiguous copyright-related terms might leave it to the data user to determine what data might be copyrighted, and obligation to share derivatives, like we said a second ago. These are the things to consider about when trying to figure out what license you want to use. So, what actually should you be thinking about? Well, licenses are out there. You've got Open Data Commons, public domain dedication and license. There's no restrictions on or requirements arising from use of the data, specifically designed for data and databases and well-suited for transportation data. So these commonly called PDDL licenses are a good route to take a look at if you're looking for ways to utilize the data. Creative Commons licenses, it's usually used for things that are not subject to copyright protection. I will fast forward here and say this is typically not the best route to use. There's a lot of problems here because oftentimes you've got to go in and figure out, well, how big is the data set? Is copyrightable data in the data set? If there's copyrightable data in the data set, is there fair use to that data set? You've got to go through a whole list of questions to figure out what you can use the data. And you've got Open Data Commons and Open Database licenses. It's usually okay for user data, and database content license, which is a companion that grants license to the database. So these are all different ways, and there's a whole bunch of other standard licenses. You've got open use of data agreements, computational use of data agreement, and these are the two I wanted to highlight briefly. The open use of data agreements and the computational use of data agreements are kind of, in our opinion, probably those the best used. Now, this is one point I'd very much encourage you to go read this white paper, because those are the ones where I think that you will get the most flexibility in using the data, and specifically the data, and once again, and how it could be used for training of AI models. That's what you want to focus on, and really it makes clear that the data can be used if it's not present later on, or it's only present to a de minimis extent. Those are the two licenses that I would encourage you to take a look at, and that's going to really help facilitate further development in the future. So, this is a list of what data providers should do. Data providers should consider the use of appropriate standard data-focused licenses, clearly spell out rights to use the transportation data and database. What can I use this data for? Just for research? And really what this comes down to, the key part is, can I use this for commercial use? And really, what is that commercial use? Not only, a vague definition of can this data be used for commercial use, but really what is in the scope of commercial use is incredibly important. Consider whether you need to impose any restrictions on the use of the transportation data. If it's not commercially specified, define what that means, specify reach of sharing requirements, and specify which IP rights are licensed. There's a variety of IP rights, and there can be lots of litigation if something is being used to violate those rights. You want to be very clear And if you are a user of the data, you want to know exactly which IP rights you're having considered and which ones you need to be careful not to transgress. You need to specify when if attribution requirements apply. So if you're using this data set from somebody, when do you need to make sure you're telling people you're using the data set? Do you need to know as the data set if you're remaking into a different database? Or once again, if you're incorporating it into an AI model, do you need to tell people there? Finally, consider whether there's a need to include privacy protections. We're going to talk about privacy protections significantly next, but this is key. So, how's this all come down? A number of the standard data licenses covered in the paper or well thought out custom licenses could be good choices to foster the development of smart mobility products and services. There's a whole bunch of licenses, and really some with custom terms, to make clear and transparent where the data could be used and how people may want to use that data. More importantly, a number of the data licenses that are commonly used right now aren't great. They're vague, they're unclear for how you can use it, and so you may want to avoid that. I don't know if there's conversations going on about saying, look, we always use a Creative Commons license. This could be fine. Be careful about that, is our kind of our top line there. And then it's important to have the relevant data terms. By that, how you can use the data, what's going on, clear to the relevant user. I know that was, like I mentioned, that was the most legal part of what I wanted to talk about, but it's also the most important. Because unless there's clarity in how the data can be used when it's collected from either smart cities or automated vehicles, all of the things we talk about, whether it's new AI models or kind of the advancements of municipal growth with smart cities, is going to be that much more difficult if we can't understand how the data works and how the data is protected and how you can use it. And so it's incredibly important that there's a strong focus on using the right license. So, as I've said it over and over again, let's talk about privacy. The privacy concern with smart cities runs along a spectrum. And by that, I mean you've got basically two poles of where people are the most concerned about. The one end, we talked about, is government surveillance in areas like San Diego, where we had the smart street lights. The other end of the spectrum, which we haven't really talked about that much yet, is data security. You have cities, you have automobiles, you have all this, collecting all of this data about everything. Some of it incredibly personal. This is where this person was moving, this is what was happening. All you need to do is open up the paper and understand about the number of cyber attacks that happen. Look at Los Angeles itself was subject to a ransomware attack, and it collected a lot of data. This is a real risk. And so this is where the 2 points in privacy come about. There's an important for privacy, not only in the kind of civil liberty, government surveillance sense, but also in the much more important, the data could be stolen sort of sense. We need to be protected in that way. So, how do you address those concerns? You address those concerns in the way that we've been talking about all along, which is, first, you get people involved. You get people involved to talk about the concerns that they have, to make sure they understand how their data is being used, to make sure they understand how their data is being collected, and you're having real, honest responses about that. So that creates trust with the residents. And after that, you can address the privacy concerns, whatever those may be, as they come up. You can have that process. The concerns get raised. You can pull from public comments, and then you can have this iterative process of trying to address the concerns as they come about and as they develop. So, none of these privacy concerns are new. They've all been present before. Whenever we talk about privacy, we can talk in a variety of areas. What's new is presenting them in the context of smart cities, where you've got data collected all across the street from various different ways. So what is the newness there? What is the challenge there? And the challenge there is the omnipresence of it. You feel like it's much more, it's not just the data that you're putting in your email. It's not just the data that you're doing online. It's everywhere else. And so to do that, smart cities present a unique opportunity, not only in what they have inherently to do and collect this data and use it and help build new technologies, but also for ways to create new ways of interacting with the community and to have these privacy discussions that we've been talking about. So for example, one thing that can be done, and that we've seen in other areas, is privacy impact assessments. A lot of this is modeled after what goes on in Europe with the GDPR. The Federal Trade Commission also can call on privacy impact assessments. And what it says is basically, let's take a look and see what's happening in our infrastructure and what privacy protections are in place, not only within our government agencies, but also our vendors. And Seattle is a great example of this. And the white paper goes into this much more depth of going in and take a look at, well, if we're contracting with these vendors and we're working with them in our system, what privacy protections do they have in place? And then you can bring that in and you can incorporate that into a much more fully developed and also transparent relationship to say, look at us, we have gone through, we've evaluated where all of our privacy vulnerabilities could be and how we're going to be able to address them in the future. And let us tell you not only the types of vulnerabilities, but the levels at which we've addressed them, that not only with our own infrastructure, but also everybody who we're contracting with as well. Another key way to do this, besides privacy impact assessment, is the focus on anonymized and de-identified data. Building in protections to ensure that data is anonymized and de-identified, submitted, and also that it can't be re-identified is incredibly important too. That helps create the longer point of trust and the longer and public trust in that people's privacy protections aren't being removed. And also, not only, to be clear, not only does it help the public trust, it also helps with legal risk as well. Because if you've got data that's being identified or re-identified, that creates a much stronger legal risk that you could be violating not only a state privacy law, but as well as potential federal regulations as well. So, what are the dangers? You've got dangers of overcollection, unexpected uses, and how to fix that, and maybe you've got limited volume as well. What's key in addressing all of this is using, once again, standard measures that are often used in the privacy space, which is data minimization. You only collect as much data as you absolutely think that you need to do for your specific goal in mind for that end. And at the same time, you are being clear about what you're using that data for. I know that sounds very, very generic, but it's a tried and true method in helping to address these problems and privacy challenges in a wide variety of contexts. So once you've done that, though, we get back to what we were talking about a moment ago when it comes to contracting, which is sharing the data. Who are you trusting with to share the data? And these goes in the contractual terms. This goes, and as I mentioned a second ago with Seattle, when they took a look at what they're doing with their vendors to make sure they all had appropriate privacy protections in place, how those were working. You want to vet them, and you want to potentially even have a certification program to make sure the vendors are also following all the necessary privacy protections. That helps create the trust of one more level of look at the several degrees that we are going about to make sure all these privacy protections are in place, not only with us, but everyone we're working with as well. So, that is a long way to go to get to my favorite part of this. This is mostly because this is the white paper that I worked on, and so this is the only thing I really want to talk about. We had a lot of discussion on the last panel, which once again was excellent, about these problems that we're trying to address, whether it's the smart city space, whether it's the CAV space. They transcend state borders. A lot of them even transcend national borders. So what are we doing? How is this working? We've talked about, data governance frameworks on the kind of the local level. Well, we need to be careful about surveillance. We need to have public trust. We can see what happened in Toronto. We can see what worked in Seattle, what sort of worked in New York, all these other issues. We can see, hey, if you're doing this and you've got a legal use, because we want to build technology, we're interested in moving it forward. Here's how the law governs, but then when the law governs, it's really a contractual basis. It's between me and you. This is our license to use this data. This is our contract to use this data. It's not really about the larger regulatory frameworks in that way. So what does that mean for the direction where we're headed? All of the laws we talked about are all intertwined with a whole bunch of other regulatory regimes that we're seeing right now. The biggest one, which we just had an entire section on, was privacy. And to be clear, I mentioned that, look, there are some federal privacy considerations that need to be taken into account. But the majority of privacy considerations are at the state level. Why? The answer, and as was heard from the introduction, I joined Covington. I was a litigator at the beginning of my career, but I joined Covington after serving as General Counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I don't know if anyone here has ever had to deal with Congress, but my line is this: it's worse than you think. it's much worse. So they're a unique brand of terrible. So there has been a push for several years, longer, to have a federal comprehensive privacy law. Didn't happen. Still is not going to happen. There's conversation today about it happening. Not going to happen. Because of the nature, the way that federal lawmaking works right now, all the stuff you read in the paper is about it's too divided. All of that tends to be true. And you've got some incredibly sensitive issues. The privacy space is about preemptions and private rights of action, all these things. But that became clear. That's not new. That's old news. And in the face of those things happening, instead what you're going to happen is the states start developing their own privacy laws. And you've got a patchwork of state privacy laws all across the country. You're seeing the same thing happen now with artificial intelligence. All this talk, once again, everybody, if you are a member of Congress, you are required to go, I've got an AI bill. I don't know what it's about, but like they've got to have one. Or everybody's part of a working group, or everybody's got their idea. I don't know about you. I haven't seen an AI, a comprehensive AI bill passage. We had an AI executive order, which talked about a whole lot of things. It was a kitchen sink order that threw in every agency under the sun to help promote regulations. Why did it do that? Because there's a recognition that you're probably not going to have a federal comprehensive AI law anytime soon. So what does that mean for what we're talking about now? Well, those are the two things that are very much linked to smart cities and automated vehicles. Undermining all of these, and once again, one reason we're not going to have a comprehensive AI law is because those talking about AI law usually say, well, this is really a privacy issue, and that comes down to the state level. And a lot of this comes around, too, is how are we going to have a comprehensive law dealing with automated vehicles if we can't solve the privacy problem? There were two separate bills that's been introduced in recent years trying to preempt any state law regulations about automated vehicles. One even passed the House of Representatives and then went nowhere in the Senate because it's hard to do hard things. So where is that going to leave us? I'm going to fast forward this side because I am confident everybody in this room understands this stuff. So, as I mentioned, no federal law. We've got agency rules, and disappointed our colleagues just left us, US DOT leading that charge, and you've got some state laws as well. So what are all of these state laws and regulations focused on? They're focused on ensuring safety, supporting development by issuing exemptions and permits, saying, look, we're going to allow development of automated vehicles, and we're going to do that by saying that there's exceptions to the current laws and regulations. We're going to revise regulations. We're going to take a look at the regulations that we have now to make sure they're not standing in the way of what we see is of innovation. Promoting disclosure to go along with the theme of transparency we've talked about to make sure people understand what's happening. Aligning infrastructure. Things can't work by themselves. You've got to change infrastructure too to make sure it all works together. And then partnering with the private sector. You've got a large recognition that governments can't do this alone, and it's going to be the private sector that's going to help push it forward. So, federal landscape. I am sure everybody here is shocked that DOT is taking the lead on automated vehicle regulations. That will continue to be the case. The exception is the FCC's jurisdiction over some of the cellular communications between connected automated vehicles. The states have prioritized testing and licensing of automated vehicles. So you've got DOT mostly focused on safety, kind of federal safety standards, and the states really focusing on the licensing. And then you have things like the executive order, which once again, great for executive orders that encourage innovation. They say, go do this. This is great. But is it really helping push things forward? Is it really helping move the ball forward into what we need into a working framework for automated vehicles? So federal, in my view, and I think people should feel free to disagree, DOT views safety as the leading goal. The Highway Safety Administration voluntary guidance on CAVs, detailed design elements. There's ongoing rulemaking about automated driving systems. And then the states are really focusing on the safety approach for testing of vehicles and insurance and deposit requirements. Once again, I don't think this is shocking to anybody in this room, but it just shows the kind of the parallel tracks of what we're seeing both on the federal and state level. As I mentioned, you've got the federal government doing waivers for safety standards to enable the research and testing of CAVs, as well as the FCC waiving certain cellular requirements for connected CAVs. And the state approach, California is making a permit-based program and testing programs for automated vehicles. This is all things that we've seen happen in several areas. You've got the waiver of the federal regulations, which is what the federal government can do. State approaches helping try to create opportunities to actually test the vehicles and move them forward. So, kind of going through each of these categories individually. In revising regulations, you've got the federal approach, which is trying to revise regulations to make sure they're inclusive of automated vehicles, which makes sense, is logical. State approach, you've got Nevada, in our opinion, is taking the lead on modernizing transportation laws to make sure that the regulations, account for and allow the testing and moving forward. I would encourage you, once again, take a look at the white paper here. I think it's really, if people are unfamiliar with what Nevada's doing, I think it's worth some time to pay attention and see kind of what can be done, what flexibility can be built in to really help that development. Disclosure. One of the things that's interesting when it comes to disclosure, and I will say this, it's hard to figure out, to pinpoint sometimes, what is the holdup? What is the sticking point besides, federal legislature being broken? What is really stopping things? For federal lawmakers, never underestimate the importance of the story, the anecdote. All it takes is one story about a problem with an automated vehicle, and then suddenly you've got a member of Congress obsessed with it. That's the only thing that's in their mind. It is, senator, congressperson, let me tell you about all these great things that this infrastructure is doing for your state in particular, your district in particular, that's helping build things up. Well, I read this story in the Times about disclosure is important, because without this disclosure and this focus on disclosure, it's going to be difficult to put things in context. Not only is it important for public trust, but it helps make sure the real narrative and the true narrative is being told about the regulatory framework. So in the federal approach, you've got the voluntary safety self-assessments and A/B test initiative. And then in places like California, you've got disclosure for certain actions. Once again, if you are unfamiliar in this room with kind of some of those California requirements, I'd highly encourage you to take a look at the white paper and look at some of the specifics. Aligning infrastructure. Federal approach is preparing transportation systems for automated vehicles. I think we heard a little bit about that too, about the focus there. That's nothing new. And I think on the local, state level, you're trying to build corridors for that as well. I think possibly people even sitting here in Michigan are quite familiar with some of those efforts that have been particularly productive. Partnering with the private sector. This is, in my opinion, the key to trying to figure out where things are going to go in the future. When you have situations where you may have some misalignment or lack of capability between what the federal and the state government can do, or you have this kind of borderless approach, private industry is really going to have the key voice and the key role to play to figure out how things are going to move forward and what's going to happen next. So the federal approach is promoting innovation collaboration, maximizing research opportunities, and the states are really doing the same thing with trying to create consortiums for the same purpose. It's going to be that key. Now, once again, the caveat that we talked about right at the beginning of private sector investment is important, but it's got to be clear. Everybody has to understand what their role is to play, and that will allow for the next step. But nonetheless, the private sector, so it's like private sector with an asterisk. Like, don't forget that last part, because that is key. So this is it. This is my last slide. This is the road ahead. What are we going to see? Updates to existing regulations. We're already seeing that happen now. We'll continue to see that happen. Adoption of CAV-specific regulations. Once again, we're already seeing part of that happening. We're going to see more efforts to foster the development of CAVs, increase public-private partnerships, and creation of test beds for CAV testing and operations. I'll be the first to say that's vague. I think the road ahead, I think that there's a commitment and understanding of where regulatory frameworks need to go. And we have discussions like the one we're having today and the conference that we're having today, which is clear in helping show the overall investment and dedication for what's going to happen. But there is a lot of room to shape things, in our opinion, after looking at the landscape that we've seen. There's a lot of room to have a voice here. We've seen some ways that have worked. We've seen some ways that have been effective in helping create what seem to be technologies, whether it's smart cities or CAVs, that help not only citizens themselves, but also help grow the economy in bigger ways, help grow municipalities. There are ways to do that. It's just being mindful about all the different stakeholders involved. If you're a private industry, understanding, helping to make sure that people know what you're doing, what your role is. If you're the government, having the same role, making sure that you're invested and telling citizens that how you're protecting their privacy, what you're doing with other vendors, how you're protecting that. If you are just contracting to a single person, making sure there's clarity there. Because if for some reason there's a lack of clarity in how you're working with people that you're trying to share data with, then it's going to be much more difficult to move to the next stage. It's going to be much more difficult to use these things to help push to the next level. And so I think those are the key things, is focusing on the public trust, focusing on the transparency. That's where the road ahead is. And I think if you're doing that, there's an incredible opportunity to build. That is the least legal thing I think I could probably say from a regulatory standpoint. That is not black letter law, but that is what we've seen, and that's what we think the framework is moving forward. Like I said, I promised I would not drone on very long. I am happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. Otherwise, I'll give some time back. Thank you. Oh, please.
Approach to the privacy concern, I can't help but draw some parallels between, oh, thank you, love a mic. Oh, God, okay. I can't help but wonder what the Venn diagram of states that have banned abortion and states that have lax privacy laws with this, because there already has been a bill introduced by, I think, Katie Britt of Alabama to track pregnant women, called pregnancy.org. And so they're trying to gather database information on women, and in combination with that, they're also trying to, in some states, create laws that make it illegal for pregnant women to travel out of the state. And so by having a smart city with lax privacy regulations, these Republicans who are introducing these bills will be able to track pregnant women who are seeking abortions in different states, in their states where abortion is legal. So I'm wondering if you have any thought about that or insight into that, or have the Venn diagram of what states have these very strict abortion laws and which ones have very concerning privacy laws or lack thereof.
So I don't have a Venn diagram. I think what I can talk about is general trends with privacy, and at least general trends with privacy, absent I think the specific issue that you raised here, which. So you've got a patchwork of privacy laws throughout the country, right? California has one, Virginia has one, Illinois has. Everybody has a privacy law. What has been interesting, and I think one reason to do it is, and this is one reason where there has been a drive to a federal privacy law, there does seem to be a large interest in privacy that is bipartisan, that is across the country. Everybody wants to have privacy in some ways. This is why it's so important. Now, and this is where I don't have the Venn diagram, and I think I'm probably unqualified to speak on. There are still differences in how that privacy works. For example, I mentioned the federal privacy law. A lot of the big debates there were on two issues. One, how much the federal privacy law would preempt state laws. Would it just be a national law, or was it actually going to say, we're taking away, now this is a control, California's privacy law is not enforced just as much as Alabama's may not be. The second one is a private right of action, which is if my privacy is violated, can I bring a lawsuit? These are the two big contentious issues. So that all goes to say is there is, in my opinion, a large consensus about a need for privacy, but there's obviously still a lot of issues that people are working out. I realize it's an unsatisfactory answer, but I don't think I'm qualified to speak on the specifics there. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.